Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is the co-founder of RP Strength and Team Full ROM. Today's guest is Dr. Mike Israetel. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
For sure. So, Mike, I kind of like to start each podcast off by asking my guests the same two questions. So the first question that I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Kevin LeBron. Every time I look at his physique, I'm just baffled that like such a human being exists. I'd say Dennis James. Dennis James, I have a few of his pictures saved to my sort of like motivational pictures folder because he got such a level of big for his frame that I have no idea how he did daily tasks, which is just completely inspirational.
Very cool. Very cool. Now you're also, you're a strength athlete, not just a bodybuilder. So are there maybe some, physical culture athletes or strength athletes that you really admire or looked up maybe when you're younger at some point as well?
Oh, of course. Yeah, probably my favorite strongman of all time. I'm a huge fan of strongman sport. And I watched all the World's Strongest Mans during Christmas when they came out back in the day. And so Sven Carlson was just one of my favorites. And it's just his attitude and the fact that in 99, 2000, 2001, he went third, second, and first at World's Strongest Man, which I just thought was like, geez, what a picture perfect way to do things. And I watched all those more or less live, as they happened. And I was just like blown away. So that's somebody I really look up to.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us, Mike, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then what was the reasoning that you started lifting weights at that age?
Yeah, 15 years old. And that's because I started wrestling a few months before then. And during wrestling, I realized I was very weak. And I had wrestled other people, especially people that were more muscular and stronger. I sort of, just through experience alone was like, yeah, if I was more muscular and stronger, maybe I'd be better at wrestling. And hilariously enough, I fell so much in love with lifting that I ended up just wrestling in high school and lifting the rest of my life.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us a little bit, Mike, more about kind of your childhood, your upbringing. Talk to us a little bit about where you grew up. Talk about, wrestling, any other extracurricular activities that you kind of were involved with, family dynamics up to about high school, and then we'll transition from there.
Sure. So I actually was born in Moscow, Russia, which at the time was the Soviet Union in 1984, making me 37 years old currently. And, so spent up until age 7 in Moscow, Russia. And some, fond memories, some not so fond memories. And that was really cool. So I'm actually fluent Russian speaker. I, speak at the level of a not so intelligent 7-year-old child, which means I can probably get around and not much else. And then my family moved in 1991 to the glorious megalopolis with flying cars and robots called Detroit, Michigan. And believe it or not, compared to communism, it was amazing. So in 91, we came to Detroit on June 5th, 1991. And then I grew up basically mostly in Oak Park, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. And I, went to elementary school, went to like a Jewish elementary school for a while, then regular public school, public middle school. And, when I was a kid, when I was, every age up until age 12, I was, skinny / in fine shape, child shape. And I liked being physical. I loved running around and jumping. When I was 10, I started getting really fast. And I was really kind of not obsessed, but fascinated. Like, oh my God, I can run so fast. It was crazy. And then when I was like 12 or 13, I spent one summer just playing video games with my best friend. And I just got like chubby. And I stayed chubby from age 12 to age 14. And then I discovered, one of my, to this date, probably one of my absolute best friends, he just randomly, after school, I was like, hey, what are you doing? You want to hang out? And he's like, I'm actually on my way to try out for wrestling. And I was like, okay, I just went with him. It's total random chance. And I went with him and he ended up wrestling for 1 year and I ended up wrestling for 4 years and then later started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So it's kind of a lifetime thing for me. But, so that's how I got to that. And once I started wrestling, I lost a bunch of body fat. Of course, I became a teenager, so became more mature. And then, of course, that's when I started lifting, et cetera. But I was kind of like, when I was a kid, I was always really impressed with strength and power and superheroes and special forces people, like I remember this one gentleman, one of our teachers in middle school, her husband was a Gulf War veteran, and he came to talk to us once, and I just sat in the front like this the entire time. So it sort of made sense that I got into what I got into afterwards.
So before we kind of move on from the younger years, talk to us a little bit, if you don't mind, Mike, about being an immigrant. What was that like, coming obviously from Moscow, probably not the best situation, over to the United States? What was that like for you as a young person, and kind of just like, growing, learning, knowing that on some level you were different, right? What was that like for you personally?
Yeah. So like, I have a few memories pertinent to that. One was a few weeks after we got in, I started to go into summer camp. It was a day camp. So it's kind of like school. You leave at 8 in the morning, come back at 3, get on a bus, come back on a bus. And it was at the Jewish Community Center of metropolitan Detroit, which is of course a harbinger of athletic talent. Not at all. But in any case, I remember I knew almost no English. I knew very little English, and I knew how to say pretty clearly, I thought, I don't speak English. And I remember getting off of the bus at age 7, and one of the counselors, a very nice young lady, seemingly, was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I do not know how to speak English. And she was like, blah, 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 blah. And remember, even at age 7, I had like a nasty, sarcastic sense of humor, because in my own head, I was like, I just told you I don't know how to speak English. Why can't you just point? Like, what else could you possibly tell me that I would understand? So, and everyone, the thing is, Americans are just, at least when I was in Russia, Americans like a category level nicer than probably most other people, and certainly Russians. So almost nobody ever made fun of me. I remember there was this one girl who was also Russian. She was more Americanized than me. She was in my little bunk or troop or whatever in camp. And I tried to talk to her in Russian, and she was like, she draked me. She was like, nah, fam. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm not going to talk to you. And, like the cool thing about being 7 years old is, I think after 6 months, I was fluent in English. And after a year and a half, I had no accent. So kids are just sponges. And so I don't actually have a whole lot of memories of people saying, oh, you're different, this and that. Mostly, 7-year-olds just don't care. But they're like, you sound weird. And you're like, okay. And I do remember one time, one of the teachers in 2nd grade, it was the first school year I attended in America. We had like an activity which was like, what do your parents do for work? And I told her, my dad is a physicist. And she's like, do you mean physical education teacher? I was like, no. And she's like, yes. And she wrote that down. I was like, okay, I guess I'm just a liar. And she like, maybe I just didn't understand. Physicist wasn't something she knew. I thought that was really funny. Maybe I just wasn't adept enough in English language to explain to her what was going on. But so those are kind of my memories there. But generally everyone was very nice. I got language stuff aside, I got bullied, pretty significantly in middle school and early high school. And, I guess I just wasn't a really big fan of that. Some people get bullied and they don't like it while it happens. And then afterwards, they get over it. I don't think I ever got over it. Maybe I'm still not over it. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now. I'm a brown belt, do combat sport. And, like if I ever met some of my bullies from back in the day, and they were like, oh my God, there's not a 100% chance I wouldn't physically assault them today. There's 99% chance they're safe. Maybe if they caught me on the wrong day, so I think one of my, probably big motivations for wrestling and for lifting and for getting enormous was just never again do I ever want to feel weak. So and maybe part of that is another thing. Like my dad used to wrestle with me all the time when I was a little kid, and he used to tell me, he's like, you're very strong. And I believed it. And when I got bullied, I was like, oh, clearly that was false. And I didn't like to be dethroned like that. And then so I spent more of the rest of my life up till today trying to prove to everyone that I'm tough or some shit like that. So I think that's some insight of my childhood.
Cool. Awesome. So let's talk about then, once you were finishing up with high school, Mike, where was your mind at in terms of continuing education? Or I kind of like to ask, what were you thinking about what you wanted to be, quote unquote, when you grew up? And then once you graduated high school, how did that kind of unfold?
Yeah, good questions. So when I was all the way up to age 14, apparently, so I found out later, I had undiagnosed attention deficit disorder. And it was so bad that I was like pretty close to the worst student in my class, and every class I had ever been in up until the end of my freshman year of high school, the absolute worst. And at the same time, like people around me kind of didn't seem to think I was stupid, or it wasn't because I was stupid. like at the same time that I was the worst math student and every other kind of student in the 8th grade, I won our school's geography bee, and I took top 50 in the state of Michigan in geography. And I had been administered like a verbal. That happened. I have like Russian Jewish parents, so they just thought I was being lazy. So my dad, it took a long time to beat my ass for a really long time for that shit. And I kind of agreed with him. I thought I had it coming. And because schoolwork to me just seemed impossibly difficult. I was like, how the hell do people do this? This is like, I look at all the numbers on the sheet and I was like, this is nonsense. So I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll be a failure. And towards the end of my 9th grade year, or towards the middle, my mom was actually, so she was an English translator in Russia. She had done a bunch of other jobs in the US, but she was actually getting her education. She was getting her master's of social work in the United States right around the time she was finishing that program when I was a freshman in high school. And, they go through all the different mental disorders and things like that. And she's kind of like looking at her book, looking at me, looking at her book. And she's like, I think maybe he has attention deficit disorder because it fits every single criteria. And she got me into a child psychologist who ran a couple of diagnostic tests. And, I scored like just above the genius cutoff on verbal IQ. And then when they actually had me try to focus on anything, they're like, you're right above mental retardation. So generally when they see that, they're like, you're not just dumb or whatever. You're not just lazy. Something is really up. So I was prescribed the medication Adderall when I was in the tail end of my 9th grade year. And the very first day that I went to class, this is still one of the top 3 greatest moments of my life, because I sat in class and normally the teacher would write equations on the board and I had absolutely no idea what was going on. And he was writing equations on the board. I would look at the equations and he was like, what's the answer to this? And I'm like, I know the answer to that question. That's that. And he's like, correct. And they just kept doing that the entire class. And I walked up to him and I was, at the time, I think I was getting like a 36 or a 16% in this class, something absurd, like way below an F, like I could double my grade and it would still be an F. I was like, hey, I'm going to be your best math student. And he was like, okay, like, what do you say that? The kid like underperforms. He just walks up to you and says he's going to be great. He's like, that's nice. So, and then Adderall worked really well for me in high school. And by my senior year, I was like the most decorated math student in my entire high school for the past 3 or 4 years and after. And that was kind of sweet. So it turns out I was pretty smart, and it was really cool because I was like, oh my God, my brain works. And then in college, Adderall stopped working and I had to get off and all that stuff. I'll get to that in a bit. But basically in high school, like I was a nerd my whole life. I was always fascinated with psych. When I was a little kid, I read the entire encyclopedia somehow, and I found it all very interesting. And when I was in high school and realized I was, somewhat intelligent, I was like, oh my God, I can finally do the things I love, which is math and science. So in high school, my only goal was to just do a lot of math and science, which I did. And I got into the University of Michigan, which is the only school I applied to, hilariously. And I got into the engineering program because, smart kids that were good at math and science, they went into engineering. And that's what I did. So I went to the University of Michigan right after school. And that was the extent of my planning of what I wanted to do. I had an idea that I wanted to work on like molecular machines and nanotechnology or something. That was the most fascinating thing to me that I had seen in school. But I had all sorts of other ideas about what I wanted to do. And actually my freshman year at Michigan, my undeclared major was nuclear engineering. And I did some work in the lab there. I was fascinated by it, still recreationally read about nuclear engineering. Who the fuck says shit like that? It's weird. That's why I got beat up a lot, right? So that was kind of my thing. I just knew it was going to be really math and science heavy, and I didn't know specifically what it was going to be about.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, how did starting to lift weights at 15 and kind of falling in love with training, as you said earlier, Mike, how did that kind of change things for you once you graduated from high school? When you went to the University of Michigan, did you really fall more in love with training? Did you set that aside because of your studies? What did the physical culture, the physical training look like once you got into college?
Yeah, I mean, I never set it aside. As soon as I started training, within a few weeks, I mean, it wasn't apparent to me at the time, but in retrospect, it was something I was never, ever going to set aside. And I trained full time. I took no more than a week off, maybe in the first 10 years of lifting. So I kept lifting. And I remember in my senior year, I believe, in high school, I was doing some bench pressing. And one of the gentlemen, this was at the Jewish Community Center, so everyone's super strong. And one of the guys who was just a member there, he was actually an old sort of like federation record holder in powerlifting. And he watched me bench press and he was like, you could be really good. And I was like, oh, thanks. And he's like, but I need to teach you how to actually bench press because you're doing it wrong. You know, I was doing it flat back with my shoulders out. And so he taught me how to bench with an arch and retraction. And at first I was like, well, I believed him because I knew who he was. And I looked up to him. I was like, oh my God, freaking Bill is talking to me. This is crazy. And I bought in. And, you know, the first few weeks, my bench went down because, you know, it's weird technique to do all that stuff. And then my bench went up and then up and then up and then up, and it kept going. And I was benching like in the high 300s at 180 my freshman year in college, like drug-free or whatever. And that was at the time pretty close to some federation records. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and compete. And I competed the bench only meet, and I broke a federation world record, which, you know, I thought at the time was a real world record. Federation records wasn't something people talked about much at the time. But to me, it was like this little glimmer of hope that I could, you know, be somebody in the sense of like, wow, I actually did something pretty impressive, at least to myself. And then once I started competing in powerlifting, because after that, funny enough, one of my best memories from that meet was I watched the people who squatted and deadlifted, and I was like, damn it, I want to do that shit. Looks way more fun than bench only. And I was like, you know, next meet I did was full power. And as I competed in powerlifting, basically my entire undergraduate career at Michigan, I became fascinated with the idea of getting stronger. And when you're getting stronger generally, like just being a big guy at the gym, you know, you can like not do science shit or not care about the specifics because it's like, well, you know, I'm just getting stronger. But when you have physical numbers, like very quantifiable numbers, like your bench is X, Y, Z, or squat is whatever, then you start to become really obsessed with like, how can I really make those numbers go up? Like not feel like I'm stronger, be stronger. And then I, you know, because I was super big into science and I was super big into getting stronger. And I was like, how do we solve problems in the real world? Like if, you know, if they want to move a big pile of sand from point A to point B, they use science. They're not like, well, it looks like it weighs this much and I feel like this will work. Fuck that. So what ends up happening is I switch my major to kinesiology and begin a now lifetime pursuit of trying to first figure out how to get stronger. And then as I continue to powerlift in college, I started buying muscle magazines for some reason. I just like saw one on the shelf once at like a pharmacy and I was like, people can look like that. And then I started reading muscle magazines, and then I started slowly transitioning away from powerlifting into training as a bodybuilder. And my obsession changed from trying to become as strong as possible to trying to become as jacked as possible. And that's sort of what led me to the rest of my career.
Cool. So I want to kind of like just you know, you have a lot in terms of just your life and your experiences. But for the sake of time, I just kind of want to put a wrap on the educational experiences because you are a doctor, you have your doctorate. So just talk to us about after you graduated from the University of Michigan, what did you pursue in terms of your studies up to your doctorate? And then I want to kind of just get back into the powerlifting, the strength, and the bodybuilding. Does that sound good?
Of course, yeah. So after I got done with my undergraduate degree, or actually towards the end of it, I realized that I needed a master's degree to do anything meaningful as far as I wanted to do. And I actually just wanted to learn more because I didn't know that much. You know, in undergrad in exercise science, they just kind of teach you how cells work and stuff. They don't really get into like training programs. So I went and got my master's degree at Appalachian State University under Travis Triplett and Jeff McBride, who is very, very prolific, published people in the strength and conditioning world. And I got to volunteer strength coach with a D1 football team, which hilariously was no fault of my own, beat Michigan that year, which was a huge upset because Appalachian State usually is a completely different category. And I got a ton of shit from it, from my friends. That was really funny. It was like 2 weeks after I physically got to Boone, North Carolina, App State beat Michigan. And they're like, I'm like, I've never even seen the team yet. So I got a ton of great real world experience. After I got that degree, that was 2 years, I went to go to New York to personal train, and I got a job at a place called Definitions, which is a like really high-end personal training studio. Like it's not a gym. You don't just go there to lift weights. It's clients only. And my friend from college, Nick Shaw, who was on the powerlifting team at Michigan with me, he also got the same job. So we were roommates and we trained people together. And towards the end of that year in New York, I realized I still didn't know nearly enough. And I knew that there was a PhD program opening up in actual sports science, not exercise science, how to make good athletes better. I went and applied in Doc Stone's PhD program at East Tennessee State University. I got in. And that program, that 3 years that I spent there, that was what taught me the absolute core base of what I know. It taught me the training principles, specificity, oral fatigue management, et cetera. And we had classes in which we learned that stuff. And that was a true, I mean, compared to when I left that program, compared to when I got to there, I knew nothing and then I knew everything. Like it's this huge, huge thing. Met tons of amazing people, got tons of crazy opportunities. And then my next thing after was I was a professor of exercise science in close to Kansas City in Warrensburg, Missouri. And that was literally the birth of Dr. Mike, again, the literal sense, because I got a PhD, but also in the sense of like, person who sort of reasonably knows what they're doing. And that was kind of my education. And since then I've really, I think maybe tried to live up to being a sports scientist by teaching anyone who wants to listen about how to get jacked and leaner and better at sports in a scientific way.
So I want to ask you about being a professor or, a teacher, educating people, right? Because I find that fascinating. I only have an undergraduate degree, but the teaching side of strength, the teaching side of fitness and health and all that is something that I enjoy personally. What have you kind of learned maybe about yourself, about human beings, in terms of being able to be somebody in the position to educate, teach, and help them understand a subject or content matter better? Does that make sense?
Sure. I learned some cool things and I learned some things I wish I didn't know. One of the things I learned was that there are lots of people who are getting degrees in the United States, at least in exercise science, that are just in school because they play sports or because everyone else went to school, or that's where the girls/guys are there that you go to parties and have sex with later. So they go to class and they sometimes even do fine, but they don't fundamentally care about how to get more muscular or better at sports or leaner, healthier. And then there are a smaller group of students in every class that are super passionate about learning. And because I was really passionate about teaching and I, in every sense, lived the lifestyle, those students and I connected really well and ended up hiring a bunch of them at Renaissance Periodization when we started that later. Because I'm like, well, I already know you're a straight A student. You really give a shit. So why wouldn't I hire you? You're good at everything you do. It works out really well. So it's interesting. You would think that everyone who has a degree in exercise science knows something about training. And the answer is that's not even remotely true. You filled in the right boxes or the right bubbles on the test. And that means you knew some things for a little while, but there's a big difference between knowing things in a textbook and answering questions and actually being able to look at a novel scenario like, hey, here's a bodybuilder. How would you train them? That's a bit different than being like, what is the difference between this and that on a test? And while being a good test taker is probably a prerequisite for being good at coaching bodybuilders, just being a good test taker doesn't mean you're good at coaching bodybuilders or care about it or understand anything. So when people say like, well, I have a degree in XYZ, so I know things, it's like, well, tell me what you know, and then we'll really find out if you know things. So it kind of clued me into that. Like a lot of people who get exercise science degrees in the United States, I just think they're wasting their time. They should be getting a degree that's going to be more useful for something they want to do later. And that is unfortunately the case with much of college in the US. But I got to tell you that what motivated me to come to class and be a good teacher was that, sizable minority of kids, or kids that fucking adults are 18, sizable minority of students that really gave a shit and really wanted to know. And a lot of those folks that really wanted to know, almost all of them, were themselves trying to get more jacked and leaner and stronger, and they were athletes and they really cared. And so that was one of my big revelations as someone who was an educator in the field, is that some of the people that show up to learn, they don't care what you say. They don't really want to learn. And some of the people really care, and it's so worthwhile to be teaching them.
Very cool. So talk to us a little bit, Mike, about RP strength. When did that kind of come to be? And then transition into telling us about Team Full ROM and when that came to be, please.
Yeah. So Renaissance Periodization, which on Instagram is RP Strength, because Renaissance Periodization is hard to say and spell. What a stupid name. So, so Nick Shaw and I, an old friend of mine from undergrad, him and I were coaching people in New York City. And we were talking to a lot of people. We were training at bodybuilding gyms. And a lot of times, our clients who were our clients for training would say, well, I'm doing XYZ diet. What do you think about it? And they would describe the diet. And really, these are otherwise brilliant people who make like a gazillion dollars. Like one of the guys that we trained pretty regularly was the chief technology officer at Bloomberg. I mean, holy crap. that guy's an insane genius. And then, you know, folks like that would tell us what diets they were on. And we were like, people are lying to you. No, you don't have to cut out all your carbs or only eat grapefruit or what kind of crazy shit is next. And, you know, we would meet other folks who, you know, we worked with helping diets, and they would talk about how their training worked. And we just got really tired of seeing well-meaning people that were intelligent just getting ripped off. And so we decided at some point, and so kind of, yeah, we were going to do something about this. And we didn't for a while because we were just, you know, in-person trainers. And then when I went to get my PhD at ETSU, I had some of my folks that I was coaching for training and diet. I gave them away to training to Nick, or they went to train to someone else. And then I was just working on their diets, which is easy to do over distance. And then they got in real good shape, and they referred me to other people that I had never met that were also diet coaches. And, or sorry, I was diet coaching them. And a lot of times I was diet coaching them and getting great results. And then they would say things like, my personal trainer thinks your diet isn't working. And I was like, okay, what do you think? They're like, well, of course it's working. The guy's a fucking idiot. And I was like, okay. And then a few days later, they were like, you know, I'm sick and tired of hearing his bullshit. Do you have like a trainer you recommend in the city? And I was like, well, yeah, I do. His name's Nick Shaw. And after a while, it's kind of weird, and it's not unprofessional, but it's less than optimally professional to be like my friend. I wanted to be able to say my colleague. So Nick and I basically started a business, long story short, so we can refer to each other and sort of cross promote and exchange clients. He would train them in person. I would write their diets, et cetera, et cetera. And then we got to be so prolific in that. That was the start of Renaissance Periodization. And then, you know, we started getting way more requests than we could fulfill. Especially I had a full load of classes and coaching athletes at ETSU and research and all that stuff. And then after a while, you know, we had to hire other people, and that's how we began hiring other coaches. And after a little while, you know, we would say, okay, you know, this is what your diet looks like. And clients would ask kind of very similar questions like, why do I get carbs after workouts? Isn't fat bad for me? Blah, blah, blah. And we got tired of writing in the same answers to emails. So we wrote our first book, The Renaissance Diet, to just explain to people how scientific nutrition works. And that sort of led to a lot of other stuff down the road. So that was kind of the birth of RP. It's basically just we got tired of bullshit. And, you know, I think that the evidence-based section of the industry is much better now, even though there's still, you know, V-Shreds is still around. So there's no shortage of bullshit, but maybe a little bit more for people that don't like to get ripped off and false promises. Actually, funny enough, I just, you know, like when you pull up YouTube, you get some ads and there's only, so, you know, so you have to wait 5 seconds to click through. One of these, like on my YouTube was, this guy's like, you know, he's like, research now shows that if you drink a glass of water before you go to bed, you can lose 46 pounds in 2 weeks. And I was just like, what? So it's still around, but we're trying to fight the good fight one step at a time.
I love that, man. Yeah. And it's just crazy. And, you know, that stuff pops up on our social media because people buy it, people buy into it. Right. And it's unfortunate, but like you said, there are people like yourself and a lot of other awesome individuals out there that are, like you said, fighting the good fight, and it's a breath of fresh air. So talk about Team Full ROM then. What is that all about? And when did that come to fruition?
Yeah, well, just like a few months ago, actually. So RP, we started in like, well, I don't know, like 2013 or 2012 or something. I lose track. This week, just Full ROM, we started just a few months ago because two of my very good friends, best friends and training partners, when we're in the same area, we did live around each other for a long time. Charlie Jung and Jared Feather. Jared's actually a former student of mine from Central Missouri. Jared's the best student I've ever had. And, you know, we basically, Jared is in charge of the physique training program, physique coaching at Renaissance. And Charlie is kind of in charge of a lot of things, and he's kind of our director of marketing. And, you know, we train this certain philosophy that's sort of espoused in our book, Scientific Principles of Hypertrophy Training. And at some point, you know, we started getting a lot of followers that kind of were drinking the same Kool-Aid of, yeah, range of motion is great and focus on technique and not be an idiot. And at some point, you know, we decided, you know, we can make some funny t-shirts because people want to buy t-shirts to sort of represent their values. And we're like, you know, if we have t-shirts making fun of half squatters, we can sell some t-shirts and that'd be nice. And people could wear them and rep the brand. So we started doing that and actually worked out really well. And then we thought about it for a while and we're like, you know what, like generally we do have a community, but it's kind of split between like our YouTube and Instagram. And for the three of us have different Instagram accounts. And so we were like, we could start a community of folks, like a really cheap like membership community, where we provide the training, we provide the diet, and that's kind of the minor attraction. The major one is like, you come into this Facebook group we have, and you just get to talk and ask questions about what's going on in your training, post technique videos. Because if you post technique videos regular Instagram, a bunch of straight idiots, people have no idea what to talk about, will give you tips you just never wanted to hear. And if you're a beginner, you have no idea who to listen to. Like some jack guys like, oh, you're squatting too deep, it'll be bad for your knees. I'm like, okay, when you start squatting higher. So we actually started this Facebook community, Team Full ROM, or the Full ROM forum. And that has worked out super, super well. So now people have a place to go if they want some really good advice. And not just from us, we try to answer all the questions that pop up, but there's getting to be more and more people in the community. So sometimes we miss some, but everyone else in the community, especially the folks who kind of know a lot about what they're doing, Trevor Fulbright comes to mind, Izzy Navarez comes to mind, and these folks are in the forum answering questions for free and exchanging ideas. It's just like a cool place for people to get in and basically get like a really awesome evidence-based, no nonsense approach to losing fat, gaining muscle, and getting stronger. And that's kind of Team Full ROM. It's more or less a subsidiary of RP. And it's just kind of our like, hey, do you want to get jacked and lean? And, you're usually, our demographic tends to be, younger males or just males in general, and that really want to focus more on the bodybuilding side of things. So that's kind of our arm for that.
Love it. So I want to get back into your, strength and bodybuilding story a little bit more. So you really got into powerlifting really heavily, going into college and stuff. And then you said there was a transition. You saw a magazine, picked up a magazine, a bodybuilding magazine, and then you transitioned hard into bodybuilding. So before we talk about all things bodybuilding, Mike, what did you learn in regards to being a power lifter? Like what were like one of the two top takeaways for you individually or personally from those powerlifting years? And then how do you feel like powerlifting set you up for bodybuilding? And do you feel like having that strength foundation is very valuable for people getting into bodybuilding?
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Oh, deciding it. I decided to breathe in my saliva. Yeah, great question with a very, very clear answer. Powerlifting, the best thing it did for me was teach me two things. One is technique. Like you will learn how to squat relatively properly if you're a powerlifter, because if you squat like shit, you're just not going to be able to lift a lot of weight. Also, there's depth judgment, so you have to go deep. So at least you're squatting below parallel, and you learn that, wow, this is really a really good thing to do. And the deadlifts and bench presses and all the assistance work, once you know your lifts are objectively have to be in a very straight line with good technique, generally your assistance work is good too. Like if you watch powerlifters do assistance work, they generally have better technique than bodybuilders doing anything, because they're like, they know that, good technique is a good idea, because in powerlifting, there's no way around it. Good technique lets you lift the most weight and be the safest. And so the technique is a huge, huge thing. The other thing that powerlifting taught me was that you make gains in very, very small increments, and patience pays huge dividends. Powerlifters are used to adding 5 pounds on the bar over every week, 2.5 pounds sometimes. And big jumps is something that if you do in powerlifting, you just very quickly realize it's stupid and leads nowhere. And you'll have a meet where you put 20 or 30 pounds on your total, and it took you 8 months to do that. And you go, holy shit. And then if someone's like, what do you think you squatting? You squatted 400 last week, right? What do you think, 455? You're like, what the fuck is wrong with you? No, 405. And then next week, 410. That's how fast results actually accrue. So that when I transitioned more to bodybuilding training, I was already used to doing things with pretty good technique and to doing them in very small progressions that set you up for a lower injury risk and good all around gains over time. And it's cultivated an attitude of patience. And so when it comes from powerlifting and you see someone half squatting, or you see someone like doing, like corner rows or whatever, the one barbell row thing, and they're just like jerking around, you're like, what the fuck are you doing? How do you standardize that performance to see if you're even getting stronger over time? The thing powerlifting didn't teach me at all, and never claimed to, was mind-muscle connection. I have absolutely no idea what that was or how it was. And for a long time, I trained my back a little bit, but I had no idea what was back there. I didn't feel my lats or anything or any part of my back for 5 years of training my back. And then only when I really dug into bodybuilding, I start to pay attention to that stuff.
Very cool. So talk about your transition then, Mike, into bodybuilding. You know, talk about your first competition, unpack your competition history, and maybe talk about a few more of those things that you had to learn from transitioning from powerlifting into bodybuilding in those earlier years.
Yeah. So I got into bodybuilding because I started reading the muscle magazines and started consuming more media about bodybuilding. I just found it really fascinating. And that's one reason. The other reason was I realized I actually liked training for reps more than I like going for singles. Like when I hit a big PR single, I was like, when I got a pump, I was like, oh my. And bodybuilding training, like for higher reps, is a little bit harder than powerlifting training. Powerlifting training is real tough, but like sets of 12 in the squat, I mean, they take something religious out of you and they put something religious back into you if you survive them. So I got to liking the higher rep training and getting pumps. I liked the effect it had on my body. And eventually I just sort of did my last powerlifting meet and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to compete for a while. I'm just going to try to get big. And when I was sufficiently large, myself and Nick Shaw signed up for our first bodybuilding show. And I did that show. I dieted for like some total of like 7 or 8 months for it with a bit of a break. And I actually did the show in the same week that I defended my PhD dissertation. I have a real hard time scratching my neck because my shoulders have gotten big enough to where I can't even, damn it, put my hand back there. Good problem to have. So I did my first show, and I think it was March of 2013, the New York Metropolitans. And I did it. How much can we talk on this podcast about special sports supplements?
You talk about whatever you want. It's your story.
Sweet. Right on. So I had absolutely no idea about fluid management. I had no idea about estrogen management. Nothing remotely to that effect. I had no idea about thyroid support. So I came into that show hypothyroid as crazy, probably holding 30 pounds of excess body water, not an exaggeration. And I looked total shit. And by then I was like, I just got my PhD. I was a mild authority in the field already. And people made fun of me a lot. And I already had it coming because I looked awful. And most of those people, I just laughed alongside. I was like, yeah, I look like total shit. I have no idea what the fuck's going on. And then I got more muscular and I did another show a year later in Kansas City and I looked again awful. Still no estrogen management, still no thyroid support, still no body water awareness. I skipped a year or two, continued to get bigger and leaner. Did another show in Kansas City where I looked okay, but I got really sick the night before, so I couldn't peak properly. And I looked fine. I think I won the heavyweight class, but the competition wasn't all that intense. And I was like, okay, maybe, I don't know, maybe this can work. And then I skipped again many, many years of competing, just try to get bigger and leaner over time, especially bigger. And then finally, last year or 2020, I decided I was going to be doing a show. And in December of 2020, I still had no thyroid support, but I did manage estrogen. And I did finally figure out with my huge mentor, Broderick Chavez, Team Evil GSP on Instagram. He's now a rising authority in bodybuilding in general. And he knows drugs. That's what he knows. The only thing he claims to know. He knows a lot of other shit too, but he's an expert. And we managed to find that for me personally, a drug called aldactone, which is considered a mild diuretic, basically was a miracle drug for me. Like I took aldactone. Before I took aldactone, I looked fine. I looked pretty lean, but I had a ton of body water, just like there were veins in my glutes, but like I could take my love handles and shake them and there was just like bloop, 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 bloop. And I was like, okay, well, I clearly can't have fucking fat love handles if I have veins in my glutes. This is the weirdest body fat distribution ever. So I took aldactone and after 7 days, I had completely striated glutes. And I was like, oh, okay. And there it was. So then I won most of the divisions in that show, qualified for Masters USAs. By the time we came all the way around to what was just a few months ago, I did Masters USAs, and then I had estrogen control. I had body water control completely and thyroid support. And I was the leanest super heavyweight in the show, driest, and I took second to a guy with unbelievable lines. And now I'm a top contender in the master super heavies. Ta-da! Right? So it was kind of like, for me, bodybuilding wasn't this thing where like I was instantly a phenom or I was instantly good. I was awful, but nothing had to do with how much muscle or fat I didn't have. It was all just hormone management. And I just didn't know any better. And my problem, I should have reached out to adept coaches earlier. But anytime I spoke to someone I thought maybe knew what they were saying, they would say shit that was so stupid that I was like, I'm never trusting this person, ever, 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 ever. I'm just going to do this myself. And that happened until I met Broderick Chavez. And he really set me straight and set me on my way. And that was kind of a huge change for me.
So what is your future plans for competing, or what is kind of your future focus in terms of competitive bodybuilding?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. So I just did Masters USAs. I did super well there. And I weighed in at just 225.4, I think, which is just above the cutoff or whatever. I weighed 225.6 and the cutoff 225.4. The guy is actually like, do you want to reweigh in? And I was like, I don't give a fuck, man. I'm here to try to get the overall. I don't give a shit what happens. So what I would like to do is, sort of on the more personal side, as I haven't pushed remotely the envelope with special sports supplements, like not even close to what guys my size are doing. It's not something I'm just saying. I've consulted. Now I'm working with a gentleman named Joe Jeffrey, who's an unbelievable coach. And he's like another version of Broderick in the UK. And he looked at what I was taking and he's like, Jesus Christ, you put on this much muscle taking this? And I was like, yes. And he's like, okay. So we put together a plan to escalate a little bit above that, nothing crazy. And so far it's working like insane. But basically my goal was to try to become like a really true filled out super heavy. I'm only 5'6", so it's going to be a cool look, but I'm taking the next probably 2 years away from competing to try to gain something like, I don't know, 10 to 20 pounds of muscle. Joe Jeffrey said that I should be able to gain 20, no problem, but I'll believe it when I see it. So then, hopefully I can step on stage at something like 230. By the time I dried out, I was on stage at like 216 to 217 at Masters USAs. I was drier than shit, but like, it was pretty light. So this time I'd like to step on stage maybe at 230 if that's possible, a bit leaner, a bit drier, and significantly more muscular. And if that happens in 2 years, I'll tell you this, in 2 years or 2.5 or whatever, I'll be in the 40 plus masters category. And in the 40 plus masters, if I actually successfully don't break my leg or have a heart attack or some shit like that between now and then, if I step on stage at 230 with striated glutes, which I already had, the conditioning is a solved problem now. Something has to happen. I have to be able to win something. There's just not that many people around walking around like that, so that's kind of my plan. And if it doesn't work out, no big deal. In it mostly, say this, like, goals are awesome in bodybuilding for me. And of course I have my goals. Of course, ideally I'd like to potentially turn pro if that's in the cards. That would be awesome. It'd be a real meaningful thing. But I just love the lifestyle, I love the process. I love training. A common question I get now on Instagram is, why don't you listen to music when you train? And I'm like, I don't know. I just never even thought that, I should listen to music. I listen to music when I drive the car. I'm a huge music buff. I'm a huge electronic music fan. I have like a huge playlist of my favorite songs. It never even occurs to me to listen to them during training, because training, it pumps me up so much itself. Like, I don't need music to pump me up extra. I'll just snap my shit in half if I try hack squatting to my favorite music. So I just love, I love eating. I love the training. I love the look. I love the changes. I love the lifestyle. So I'm just living the dream, really. And goals are awesome. And they sort of set me on a direct path. But if I just get, a few more years out of this whole bodybuilding journey, I'll be super happy either way. And I'm already very happy.
Very cool. So we're going to wrap it up here very shortly, Mike, but I want to ask you, in terms of bodybuilding training, what is your kind of focus, or how do you kind of set up your programming for yourself specifically?
Yeah. So I train in the architecture that was taught to me as formal sports science. So we periodize the training. The training starts at the session level, multiple sessions added together, make a training day, multiple days together, make a microcycle, generally a week of training. And in any particular week, you do the same exercises in every given week after for like 4 or 5 weeks. and you add a little bit of weight each time, add a few reps each time, add or subtract sets based on how pumped and sore you're getting to be able to push it hard but still recover. Do that for 4 or 5 weeks. You get really tired, you take a deload week, you pick a few different exercises, a few different focuses, and then you start again and you keep doing that. Every now and again, you get really tired. You need 2 weeks of active rest or a low volume phase, or pharmacology is involved, a few months or more or less of not blasting a crap load of gear. And then you sort of recycle that process and keep going. And when you get fat, you do a fat loss phase to get rid of the fat, and then you start building muscle again, or you fat loss phase into a show. That's generally how it looks. And as far as exercise technique and selection, et cetera, one of the concepts I guess I invented or discovered as the first person to name it is the stimulus to fatigue ratio. How do we know if you're doing bent rows properly? Well, what are your target muscles? Is there a sign that you're stimulating them? Do you feel tension in your back? Do you feel a burn in your back? Or is your back getting pumped? And, a couple of other things. Is your back getting sore? And those are all good things. And then the fatigue part is like, how difficult is it emotionally, psychologically on you to do bent rows? And does it hurt your joints? And for any given exercise, or even picking an exercise, you want to pick exercises that check all the boxes for stimulus and as few of the boxes for fatigue as possible. So for example, if you're on like a new leg press machine and you do a couple of sets and someone's like, what do you think? Your quads fried? You're like, nope, feel it in my inner thighs and my knees hurt. Either your technique is off or you're not doing, or the machine is bad. That if you pick a technique and or a machine or exercise that you're like, dude, my quads are fucking like overcooked chicken falling off the bone and my knees and hips feel amazing, you got something real good. Add a little weight over time, add a few reps, add a little weight, add a few reps. And that's how muscle is grown. Again, back to the powerlifting thing, very small increments, patiently. Guys want to get into the gym, throw an extra plate on a side or an extra 25 on a side every workout. If you're trying to get hurt, that's a real good way to go about it. But if you put 5 pounds, 2.5 pounds on the bar for weeks and weeks and months, eventually you're like, what the fuck? I'm supposed to be lifting this? A funny story real quick. In my last contest prep, which just ended like 6 weeks ago, my last hard workout was a PR on the hack squat, Arsenal hack squat, which is amazing. I did 500 or 495 for a set of 15. And that was as far as I went. I started with 495 for sets of 10, or the first set of 10, just like 5 weeks before that. I worked up to 15 reps. So it just added a rep each time. That's it. So 495, 15. And then I came in after I did a month of travel, during which I trained the entire time and ate and rebounded from the show. And it's a couple of weeks ago, started back at my home gym, back in the Arsenal squat or hack squat. And I was like, I wonder, I should probably start at like 505 or 515 and work my way up. I did 495 for a warm up and I was like, I could do that for infinity reps. And so I went to 545 and did a set of 10. And I was like, that was super easy, but I'm not an idiot. I don't want to snap my shit in half. So I'm just going to start here and work up. And then my last workout a couple of days ago was 565 for a 10 that was easier than the 545. So that was very soon, if I don't break in half, I'll be doing 585 for, sets of 10 and then eventually work up to sets of 15. And it's kind of like, can I right now, gun to my head, get under 585 and do 15 reps? Yeah, I'd bet on it. What's the injury risk? High, higher than I'd like. So I'm just going to slowly add weight, slowly add reps to get there. And that slow weight and repetition, that's where all the growth happens. I think guys think, well, if I bench 405, I'll have huge pecs. Well, if we give you a shitload of Anadrol and Tren and then your nose torque, you might be able to do it now. But we look at your pecs, like, motherfucker, they're the same size. It's that little bitty extra and that weeks of training patience that makes you really jacked. That's it.
Love it. All right, Mike. So we got to wrap it up here for the sake of just time and everything. I want to be respectful of what you got going on the rest of your day. So I want to ask you maybe just to speak to some of the younger listeners that are maybe thinking about getting into bodybuilding, thinking about competing, thinking about, whatever, maybe they just started lifting weights. What's maybe just 1 or 2 things that you would just like to share with them in terms of people that are kind of just beginning strength, bodybuilding, this entire lifestyle?
Yeah. One is have fun and ease in. Don't try to train 7 days a week or some shit and eat every meal weighed out. Eat good food, have some Chipotle and pizza every now and again. Use good technique and get stronger over time, do full range of motion movements, train a number of times a week, 4 or 5 that you have fun with and doesn't beat you up, take your deload weeks, muscle will add on over time. And then when you're older, if you're starting when you're 20, by the time you're close to 30, you'll know if you want to make it more serious and you incrementally make it more serious. And to that point, unless you've been training for at least 5 years, I would prefer 10. And unless you're over the age of 25, I wouldn't start taking drugs. And, there are certainly exceptions to that. Some of the bodybuilders winning today are under 25 and they've been on drugs for a while. You can count yourself as an exception and it probably won't work out. What'll most likely happen is you'll be 32. You'll have your first mini heart attack. Your doctor will be like, you can't ever take drugs or train anymore. And you'll be like, fuck. So, I'll tell you this, a lot of the bodybuilders that you follow on Instagram, they're on drugs. They're not allowed to talk about it because drugs are illegal. So I never blame them for never mentioning it. But what you don't hear because of that is you look at the benefits of drugs. You go, oh my God, this guy's jacked. I want to take stuff. And what you don't hear are the costs, the physical costs. It's annoying, the psychological costs. Like if you're on enough drugs, you're just like anxious and paranoid all the fucking time. You wake up anxious and paranoid. It's no fun. Taking drugs is no fun. The result is cool, but it comes at an enormous price, which nobody ever talks about because it's not legal to talk about it. So just remember, don't rush into things. If you think, oh, I'm 23, I'm going to start taking drugs, you're not remotely the first person to have that idea. And a lot of people much dumber than you have had that idea and done stupid shit with it. So be patient, be intelligent, be over 25 years old and or train for at least 5 years drug-free and hopefully 10. And then if you really have what it takes, if you're really jack drug-free and you made an intelligent decision, then when you start taking the special sports supplements, you'll become something probably pretty special. But if you're like 19 and you train for half a year and you're like, fuck it, I'm going to take drugs, you'll be years and possibly forever. We have to tell people you're taking drugs. Otherwise, they don't believe you train at all. You don't want to be one of these people. So be patient.
Awesome. Great words of wisdom, Mike. I want to thank you so much for coming on, sharing a little bit of your story, Mike. Where can people connect with you and everything that you have going on?
Super. Yeah. Thank you so much. So probably the best place to find me is the Renaissance Periodization YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube and you type RP hypertrophy or RP strength or Mike Israetel, anything, you'll get the RP channel. It's right here. And just click on the subscribe button or just scroll through some videos, tons of educational content. It'll port you over to my Instagram, the RP Strength Instagram, tons of books, etc. We have a gazillion free resources and a few paid resources if you'd like. So if you like the free stuff, keep consuming that. And if you like the paid stuff and want to throw me money, I have a Lamborghini fund. I'm working on my 9th Lamborghini, or is it 10th? I lose track. All the color cars look the same. Get in there and hopefully we'll have some fun and learn some shit.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it.
Quentin, thanks so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Those of you who are tuning into another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you. 2 quick things as we close out this conversation with Dr. Mike. If you haven't done so already, make sure you go to BTM on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. That's where I release all these episodes first. So if you want to stay up on all the current podcast conversations of Behind the Muscle podcast, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Also, quickly take this episode specifically with Mike, share it on your Instagram stories, tag Dr. Mike, tag Behind the Muscle so that we know you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.